All right. So, welcome to session 2 of biological anthropology. I'm just getting stuff set up here. Let me just open a brand new document. Okay. I'm not going to waste any time because there are countless live streams that I have done that I have deleted in the past. It felt right at the time to do that, but now it just feels like the wrong thing to have done. But I was not as mature as I am now. So I've learned not to do that. And the only way you learn is through experience. That's how you learn. You don't learn by theory alone. You learn by doing and making mistakes and failing and falling on your face or doing something that you regret. So I believe that I am in the right section. Just trying to find chapter 1. Okay. So let me see how many pages this is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 16. Oh my gosh. Okay. This is going to be a long chapter. I'm going to tell you that right now. Okay, well, we better get started. Otherwise, we're going to be here till the end of the day. So, this is very inconvenient. So, I'm going to skip the introduction, since we know not to do that. Okay. Okay. Chapter 2, Section 1, The Theory of Evolution, the Context for Darwin. Before Darwin's time, Western scientists' understanding of Earth and the organisms that inhabit it was strongly influenced by religious doctrine. In the Judeo-Christian view, the planet was relatively young, and both its surface and the life forms on it had not changed since their miraculous creation. By the late 1700s, scientists had realized three key things about the world and its inhabitants. Earth is actually quite ancient, its surface is very different from what it was in the past, and plants and animals have changed over time. These realizations about the natural world provided the context for Darwin's theory of evolution. To generate his theory, Darwin drew on information from 5 scientific disciplines: geology, paleontology, taxonomy, and systematics, demography, and what is now called evolutionary biology. Geology is the study of Earth, especially with regard to its composition, activity, and history. This discipline has demonstrated the great age of our planet in the development of its landscape. Paleontology is the study of fossils. This discipline has detailed past life forms, many now extinct. Taxonomy is the classification of past and living life forms. This discipline laid the foundation for systematics, which is the study of biological relationships over time. Demography is the study of population, especially with regard to birth, survival, and death, and the major factors that influence these three key parts of life. Evolutionary biology is the study of organisms and their changes by investigating the fundamental principles by which evolution operates. Darwin founded this discipline. In the following section, we will look at these deep fields in more depth. So, geology, reconstructing Earth's dynamic history. We now know that our planet is 4.6 billion years old and that over time its surface has changed dramatically. If you had espoused these ideas in, say, the late 1600s, you would not have been believed, and you would have been condemned by the church because you had contradicted the Bible. According to a literal interpretation of the Bible, Earth is a few thousand years old and its surface is static. The Scottish scientist Jane Hutton became dissatisfied with the biblical interpretation of the planet's history. He devoted his life to studying natural forces such as wind and rain and how they affected the landscape in Scotland. Hutton inferred from his observations that these forces changed Earth's surface in the past just as they do in the present. Wind and rain create erosion, the products of which provided the raw materials in rock and soil for the formation of new land surfaces. Over time, these surfaces became stacked one on top of the other, forming layers or strata of geologic deposits. From the time it took for these strata to build up, strata, I don't know what they're talking about. He calculated Earth's age in millions of years. This was an evolutionary, indeed heretical realization. Hutton's idea that the natural processes operating today are the same as the natural processes that operated in the past is called uniformitarianism. Few paid much attention to Hutton's important contribution to our understanding of Earth's history until the Scottish geologist Charles Lyell rediscovered the idea. Lyell devoted considerable energy to thinking and writing about uniformitarianism and its implications for explaining the history of our planet. His calculations of how long it would have taken for all known strata to build up created a mountain of evidence. An undeniable record that Earth was at least millions of years old. Hutton and Lyell, relying on empirical evidence and personal observation to develop their ideas and to test clear hypotheses about the natural world, had revised the timescale for the study of past life. The next section is on paleontology, which is reconstructing the history of life on Earth. For hundreds of years, people have been finding the preserved, that is, fossilized remains of organisms all over the world. To test his hypothesis that fossils are the remains of past life, the English scientist Robert Hooke studied the microscopic structure of fossil wood. After observing that the tissue structure of the fossil wood was identical to the tissue structure of living trees. Huck concluded that the fossil would derive from once living trees. The French naturalist and zoologist Georges Cuvier demonstrated the potential of fossils to illuminate the past. Cuvier dedicated himself to learning the anatomy or structural makeup of many kinds of animals. Pioneering the fields of paleontology and comparative anatomy, he applied his extensive knowledge of comparative anatomy to fossils. By doing so, he reconstructed the physical characteristics of past animals, their appearance, psychology, physiology, and behavior. Although not very accurate by today's standards, these efforts provided early tools for understanding past life forms as once living organisms. Through detailed reconstruction, Cuvier demonstrated the fossils found in geologic strata in France were the remains of animals that had gone extinct at some point in the remote past. Cuvier's work provided the first basic understanding of the history of life from the earliest forms to recent ones. Cuvier observed that each stratum contained a unique set of fossils representing once living animals. What happened to the animals represented by each layer? Cuvier concluded that some powerful catastrophe, such as an earthquake or volcanic eruption, caused them to go extinct. He surmised that after each catastrophe, the region was vacant of all life and was subsequently repopulated by a different group of animals moving into it from elsewhere. This perspective is called catastrophism. We now know that Earth's history does not consist merely of sequential catastrophes and resulting extinctions. Past catastrophes, such as those leading to the extinction of the dinosaurs at around 65 MYA, have profoundly affected the direction of evolution, but they were not the leading factor in evolution. Ultimately, such catastrophic events are rare and do not explain even the sequence of fossils, Cuvier observed, mostly in the region called the Paris Basin in northern France. In addition to confirming that fossils were the remains of life in the distant past, Cuvier revealed that the most recent geologic strata contain mostly mammals, and earlier geologic strata contain mostly reptiles, including dinosaurs. The potential for understanding deep prehistory, life in the past, and now extinct animals and plants was recognized not only by famous scientists in positions of authority, but also by individuals who possessed a passion for and commitment to understanding the natural world and its deeper history as it is um, rep- represented by fossils of long extinct animals. Early in her life, Mary Anning developed an interest in the ancient past. She pursued this interest by searching the fossils near her coastal community, Lyme Regis, England. Fossil hunting was a popular pursuit in the 18th and 19th centuries. and one that provided an important means of supplemental income for Annie, her family, and other fossil hunters. However, it clearly wasn't Anning's passion to make money from selling fossils to local collectors. Rather, it was her deep interest in understanding what life was like in the remote past that drew her to fossils. And it goes on. I'm going to have to take some liberty with this and see if I can move on through certain sections. I don't know, because this is ridiculously long. How many pages? Oh, well, I think we can get through it. While Annie was still a child, her father took her along with him on fossil hunting ventures. Fossils found on these various trips were sold to tourists and collectors. The best fossils were sold to museums. As Anning matured into adulthood, her knowledge of the region and its deep evolutionary past developed. Over the course of her lifetime, she made significant discoveries and became a recognized authority on the paleontology of Great Britain, with special focus on the Jurassic fossil beds in southwest England dating 150 to 200 MYA. Among her most important discoveries were the extraordinarily complete skeletons of, I'm not going to even try to pronounce that, a marine reptile, and I'm not going to even pronounce that either, the earliest and largest vertebrate to have the ability to fly. These discoveries were just a few among many more that have contributed to our understanding about life long before humans. Her successes in discovery clearly documented life in deep time and provided critically important information on animals and their habitats long before the origins and evolution of hominids. The Royal Society recognized the importance of her work in the development of the discipline of paleontology by including her in the list of the 10 British women who most influenced the history of science. Taxonomy and systematics, classifying living organisms and identifying their biological relationships. Even before Darwin exposed his revolutionary ideas about evolution to Mary Anning made her important discoveries, most scientists who study life forms realized the importance of developing a taxonomy, a classification of life forms for identifying biological relationships. Early efforts at taxonomy took a common sense approach. Animals were placed within major groups such as dogs, cats, horses, cattle, and people. Plants were placed within major groups such as trees, shrubs, vines, and weeds. Unlike today's science, as late as the 18th century, scientists generally believed that species were immutable. That is, life had changed very little, or not at all, since the time of the single creation. Thus, early taxonomists were not motivated by an interest in evolution. Rather, they were motivated by their desire to present the fullest and most accurate picture of the Creator's intentions for his newly created world. To construct the best possible taxonomy, the English naturalist John Ray advocated personal observation, careful description, and consideration of plants and animals' many attributes. Ray's attention to detail laid the groundwork for later taxonomy, especially for the binomial um, nomenclature two-name system developed by the Swedish naturalist Carl von Linné. Von Linné, better known by his Latinized name, Carolus Linnaeus, gave each plant and animal a higher level genus, plural, general name, and a lower level species, plural is also species name. A single genus could include one or two species. For example, no one. Nobody's checking it. So if you, I make my videos like I have more followers than I have, and the same goes for my Instagram stories. But anyway, I'll get to a point where I have 1,000 followers. And so what really matters to me, at least right now, is that there's more videos than followers. But anyway, never mind about that. The theory of evolution, Darwin's contribution. Darwin's remarkable attention to detail enabled him to connect his voluminous reading with his personal observations made during the Beagle voyage. For example, while in Chile, Darwin had observed firsthand the power of earthquakes in shaping the landscape. Hutton's and Lyell's uniformitarianism led him to recognize that the accumulation of such catastrophes over a long period of time explains, at least in part, the appearance of Earth's present-day landscape. This understanding of Earth's remarkably dynamic geologic history laid the groundwork for Darwin's view of evolution as a long, gradual process. That process, he saw, could be reconstructed through the fossil record. He had read carefully Cuvier's studies of fossils, and in South America, he saw fossils firsthand. Some of these fossils resembled living animals native to South America, such as the armadillo, ground sloth, and llama. This evidence strongly suggested to Cuvier that an earlier species had transformed into the modern species, most likely through a succession of species over time. Drawing on Malthus' ideas about reproduction, population, and variation, Darwin wrote, "It at once struck me that under these circumstances, that is, specific environmental conditions, favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones to be destroyed. The result of this would be the formation of new species, another revelation." Darwin hypothesized that surviving offspring had attributes advantageous for acquiring food. Because these offspring survived, the frequency of their advantageous characteristics increased over time. Meanwhile, as environmental conditions changed, such as when rainfall decreased, offspring lacking adaptive attributes suited to their survival in a new environment died off. Building on these observations and their implications, Darwin deduced that natural selection was the primary mechanism of evolution. Over a long period of time, through generations' adaptations to different environments and different foods, a common ancestor gave rise to related species. Darwin's hypothesis was revolutionary, undermining the mid 19th century consensus that species were fixed types in a declining natural order of life. No species would have to be considered as populations with no predetermined limit or variation. Variation provided the open book for evolution. Darwin's background research had begun in the 1830s. It was not until 1856, however, fully 2 decades after his voyage around the world, that he gathered enough evidence and developed his ideas enough to begin writing his great work about evolution by means of natural selection on the origin of species. Darwin's colleagues had warned him that if he did not write his book soon, someone else might receive credit for the idea. Indeed, in 1858, the English naturalist and explorer Alfred Russel Wallace sent Darwin a letter and a 20-page report outlining Wallace's theory of evolution by means of natural selection. Independently from Darwin, Wallace had arrived at most of the same conclusions. Let's skip the next page. That Darwin had. Both men had been aware of their shared interest in the subject, and both men formulated their theories independently. Concerned that Wallace would publish first, Darwin completed Origin over the next 15 months and published it in London in 1859. Who then discovered natural selection, the key mechanism that explains evolution. Some argue that Wallace should be given primarily credit for the theory, however, because Wallace had not amassed the extensive body of evidence needed to support the theory. Darwin is recognized as the discoverer. Darwin and Wallace made monumental discoveries, but neither man could come up with a compelling explanation of the physical mechanisms by which evolution takes place. That is, they could not explain what mechanisms result in evolutionary change. Half a continent away, a series of novel experiments led to the discovery of these biological mechanisms, paving the way for remarkable new insights into evolution. Section 3. Since Darwin, mechanisms of inheritance, the evolutionary synthesis, and the discovery of DNA. Hello? Okay, just testing the sound. Mechanisms of inheritance. Having articulate, I should probably turn my camera so that you can see me. There we go. Mechanisms of inheritance. Having articulated and supported his theory of evolution by means of natural selection, Darwin turned to the next fundamental question about natural selection. How do the traits that are being selected for or against pass from parent to offspring? Like other scientists of his day, Darwin believed that each body part contained invisible particles called gemmules. Darwin hypothesized that representative gemmules for all body parts resided in the reproductive organs. During fertilization, each parent contributed his or her gemmules to the potential offspring. The father's and the mother's gemmules then intermingled to form the characteristics observed in their progeny, called blending inheritance. This process was a popular notion at the time. Unknown to Darwin, research elsewhere in Europe was calling into question the idea of blending inheritance. In 1865, just 6 years after the publication of On the Origins of Species, George Mendel, an Augustinian monk living in monastery in what is now Brno, Czech Republic, published in an obscure local scientific journal the results of his work on inheritance. Mendel had spent the previous 8 years crossbreeding different varieties of garden pea plants. Over the course of his experiments, he grew some 28,000 plants. These plants enabled him to identify and carefully observe seven characteristics or traits that were especially informative about breeding and its outcome over generations. From his results, Mendel inferred that a discrete physical unit was responsible for each characteristic. This unit passed from parent to offspring, and in this way, the characteristic was inherited. In fact, the discrete unit could be traced through generations, and its passage, the inheritance, was determined by mathematical laws. Mendel also discovered that the garden peas traits did not blend. For example, plants and their offspring were either tall or short. Over time, the short plants diminished in frequency and eventually disappeared. Later scientists determined that the physical unit of inheritance, the gene, has two subunits, one from the father and one from the mother, each called an allele. Each allele is either dominant or recessive. In garden peas, the allele for tallness is dominant, and the allele for shortness is recessive. If one parent provides a tall allele and the other parent provides a short allele, then the offspring having each one of each allele would be tall because of the presence of the tall allele, the dominant allele, and physically expressed, whereas the recessive allele is broken. The pure strain for tall includes one tall maternal allele and one tall paternal allele. The pure strain for short includes one short maternal allele and one short paternal allele. While Darwin's theory generated immediate excitement in the scientific community and among the public, and was supported by leading scientists of the time such as Thomas Henry Huxley, Mendel's crucial discovery, now known as Mendelian inheritance, was unnoticed. His writing was not widely distributed, and his work was simply ahead of its time. But in 1900, three scientists working independently, the German botanist Karl Rich, Corians, the Austrian um, botanist Erich um, Texemark von Steyseneng and the Dutch botanist Hugo de Vries discovered Mendel's research and replicated his findings. The Danish botanist Wilhelm Ludwig Johannesson called the pair of lilies, for example, TT. The genotype and the actual physical appearance, tall, short, the phenotype. Mendel's theory of inheritance forms the basis of the modern discipline of genetics, the study of scientific-specific genes and their function and transmission, the subject of. It makes clear that the physical units, the genes, and the two component alleles of each gene responsible for physical attributes are located in the reproductive cells, eggs, and sperm. When microscope technology improved in the late 19th century, the cell structure and the units of inheritance were defined. Beginning in 1908, the American genetist Thomas Hunt Morgan and his associates bred the common fruit fly in experiments that built on Mendel's pea breeding. All genes they discovered are transmitted from parents to offspring in the ratios identified by Mendel. The genes are on chromosomes in both the hereditary material and its carriers are duplicated during reproductive cell division. The evolutionary synthesis, the study of populations and the causes of evolution. The combination of Darwin's theory of evolution and Mendel's theory of heredity resulted in an evolutionary synthesis. Darwin's theory provided the mechanism for one cause of evolution, natural selection, and Mendel's theory showed how traits are passed on systematically and predictably. The melding of natural selection and Mendelian inheritance led biologists to ask further questions about evolution, specifically about the origins of particular genes, genetic variation in general, and change in physical characteristics over time. Why do some genes increase in frequency, some decrease in frequency, and some show no change? How do completely new genes appear? These questions and a focus on population viewed as the gene pool provided the basis for a newly emerging field in evolutionary biology called population genetics. Natural selection, or the guiding force of evolution, could operate only on variation that already existed in the population. How did new variation, new characteristics arise in the population? Through his experiment with fruit flies, Morgan showed that a new gene could appear as a result of spontaneous change in an existing gene. This kind of genetic change is called mutation, the only source of new genetic material, mutation in the second case of evolution. Gene flow, a third cause of evolution, is the diffusion or spread of new genetic material from one population to another of the same species. In other words, via reproduction, genes from one gene pool are transferred to another gene pool. Take, for example, the gene that causes sickle cell disease. Among West African blacks, it has a frequency of about 10 hertz, 10%. Among American whites, it has a frequency of 0% because West African blacks and their descendants have long reproduced with American whites. The frequency among people descended from both West African blacks and American whites of the gene that causes sickle cell disease is approximately 5%, halfway between that of the two original populations. Over time, as the two populations have mixed, gene flow has decreased genetic difference. Traditionally, gene flow has been identified as interbreeding within members of a species only. However, many mammal groups, including some early hominids, show evidence of hybridization between members of different but closely related species. Genetic drift, a fourth cause of evolution, is random change in the frequency of alleles, that is, of the different form of a gene. Such change affects a small population more powerfully than it affects a large population. Over time, it increases the genetic difference between two genetically related but not interbreeding populations. By the mid-20th century, the four causes of evolution, natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift, were well defined, thanks to a synthesis of ideas drawn from the full range of sciences that deal with biological variation. In effect, evolutionary synthesis united the branches of biology and its afflicted sciences, including genetics, taxonomy, morphology, comparative anatomy, paleontology, and the subject of this book, biological anthropology. Similarly, evolution unites living and past worlds. All organisms are related through some common descent, and organisms more closely related than others share a more recent common ancestor. DNA discovery of the most molecular basis of evolution. Once chromosomes were recognized as the carriers genes, scientists sought to understand the structure of deoxyribonucleic acid (DNA), the chemical that makes up chromosomes. In 1953, the American genetist James Watson and the British biophysicist Francis Crick published their discovery that DNA molecules have a letter-like double helix structure. Crucial to their discovery was the work of the British X-ray crystallographer Rosalind Franklin, who used a special technique, X-ray diffraction, to produce high-quality images of DNA. The combined efforts of Franklin, Watson, and Crick opened up a whole new vista for biology by helping explain how chromosomes are replicated. Analysis of the DNA from a wide variety of organisms, including primates, has provided both new perspectives on biological relationships and a molecular clock with which to time the branches of evolution based on the similarity of species within those branches. In addition, as you will find in Chapter 3, DNA provides a detailed roadmap of a wide range of diseases such as viral and bacterial infections, cancer, heart disease, and stroke. Little did Darwin realize just what a powerful foundation his evolutionary theory would build for science, ushering in the modern biological sciences. Long after his death, Darwin's search for the biological mechanisms involved in evolution would continue to inspire scientists right up to the present day. Darwin would have been pleased to see the work of conservation biologist Christopher Cadell and his collaborators on the remarkably rapid morphological changes in the highly endangered North American small kite, a raptor native to the Florida Everglades. These birds focus their diet on relatively small snails. Using their small curved beaks, they consume the snail's meat directly out of the snail's shells. The birds, however, were rapidly declining until a new larger species of invasive snails spread into the region. Cattell and his research group documented the extraordinary increase in population size of the birds and the simultaneous increase in their beak length and body size. The study also revealed increased survival in birds with longer beaks and larger bodies. Evidence for natural selection. Darwin provided the theory in the mid 19th century, and modern evolutionary biologists continue to track the evidence in support of the theory. Notably, the documentation of the evolutionary process on North American small kites in the Florida Everglades shows that evolution can occur quickly. In that setting, it all happened within a few years, occurring early when the larger invasive species of snails provided a new food source in a different package. Evolution does not have to occur for thousands of hundreds or millions of years. The questions Darwin and his colleagues asked, especially about how physical attributes pass from parents to offspring, laid the foundation for the study of inheritance, the science of genetics, and eventually the DNA revolution in the field of genomics. As for the recent studies of evolution, Darwin would have been excited about DNA and the future sciences of genetics and genomics and what they tell us about the evolution of animals and plants. But he would have been thrilled to learn how our understanding of evolution has played such an essential role in the development of our understanding of how viruses and other disease causing agents evolve and spread. For example, in 1976, the sudden outbreak of the Ebola virus came as a huge surprise, unfortunately, with very high fatality rates for humans and other primates throughout West Africa. In the most recent epidemic of 2014 to 2015, there were thousands of deaths of both humans and primates. The Ebola virus outbreak foreshadowed an infectious disease outbreak having unprecedented global consequences. As of this writing in April 2023, the coronavirus disease COVID-19 pandemic in 2019 to 2020 resulted in a total of nearly 15 million who became ill and 1 million who died in the United States and 7 million who died globally. Unfortunately, it is likely that viral pandemics will continue on a global scale, an issue relating to the remarkable capacity for the virus to evolve in a highly successful way. Indeed, the remarkably high level of evolvi- um, evolvability of viruses makes them among the most biologically successful and deadly occupants of Earth. It is their capacity to evolve that makes this and other novel viruses increasingly problematic for many host species, including Homo sapiens. Today's knowledge of the mechanisms of genetic change in the virus is built on the foundational work and evidence pioneered by Darwin in the 19th century. Knowledge of evidence of evolution, especially the mechanisms underlying genetic change has made possible the development of vaccines, including for COVID-19. Darwin's work created the revolution in biology that continues in the 21st century. Okay, we're done. With that part of it, at least. Now we have to take the notes. So I'm going to be extracting sentences from each paragraph now. So it's going to take a little bit of time for me to do that. So I have to go back to the very beginning, skip the introduction. Don't you worry about that. Let's make this a breeze because we're getting very high on time right here. I'm just going to detach and put in whatever sentence I happen to find Molsa. So the section, Theory of Evolution, the context for Darwin, before Darwin's time, Western scientists, understanding of Earth and the organisms that inhabit it was strongly influenced by religious doctrine. Okay, next paragraph. So I'm going to define, there's 3 terms here that I think is worth defining. So let me just write down the 3 terms. The first one is geology. It's the study of Earth. Paleontology is the study of fossils. Taxonomy, the classification of past and living life forms. Systematics, the study of biological relationships over time. Demography, the study of population, especially with regard to birth, survival, and death, and the major factors that influence these 3 key parts of life. And finally, we have evolutionary biology, which is the study of organisms and their changes. That was a long one, I know. Next paragraph. The Scottish scientist James Hutton if I can even find a sentence, became dissatisfied with the biblical interpretation of the planet's history. Next paragraph. Hutton's idea that the natural processes operating today are the same as the natural processes that operated in the past. Uniformitarianism. Okay. Next paragraph. To test his hypothesis that fossils are the remains of past life, the English scientist Robert Hooke studied microscopic structure of fossil wood. Next paragraph. By doing so, he reconstructed the physical characteristics of past animals, their appearance, physiology, and behavior. Moving on. Next paragraph. He surmised that after should put Cuvier, so that I know who we're talking about. Surmised that after each catastrophe the region was vacant of all life and was subsequently repopulated by a different group of animals moving into it from elsewhere. The term is catastrophism. Okay, moving on. Next paragraph. We now know that Okay, I had the itch. Had the itch. Okay. We now know that Earth's history does not consist merely of sequential catastrophes. And resulting extinctions. Moving on. Okay, next paragraph. In addition to confirming that fossils were the remains of life in the distant past, Cuvier revealed that the most recent geologic strata contain mostly mammals, and earlier geologic strata contain mostly reptiles, including dinosaurs. Next paragraph. Early in her life, like whenever I see that word written down, I should tell you, I get this, sometimes when I read, I get this voice that sounds almost like a young male voice, but it's just not very human sounding, but it sounds like that, but I don't know if any is sounding. And whenever I see life, I always think laugh, like saying it in a southern kind of way. I don't know what it is. It depends upon what I'm reading. If it's very male oriented, that voice comes in very strong, but if it's more feminine, luxa, spiritual type stuff, then it for me it's just more fun to read that. So it just depends. Anyway, I thought that I should do that. Mary Anning developed an interest in the ancient past. Okay. Okay, we're getting there. The best fossils were sold to museums. Okay, next paragraph. Next paragraph. Even before Darwin espoused his revolutionary ideas about evolution, or Mary Anning made her important discoveries. Most scientists who studied life forms realized the importance of developing a taxonomy, a classification of life forms for identifying biological relationships. Okay. Von Lin Von Lin, better known by his Latinized name Carolus Linnaeus, gave each plant and animal a higher level genus name and a lower level species name. That's important. Moving on. So, Linnaeus presented the book Systems Natura through 10 editions, adding more and more levels to the hierarchy. Next paragraph. Linnaeus like Ray, Linnaeus was committed to the notion that life forms were static, fixed at the time of the biblical creation. First, next paragraph. First, published in 1789, 1798, Malthus book made the case that an abundance of food, enough for anyone born, would allow the human population to increase geometrically and indefinitely. I'm going to have to not be so attached here. Just put something down. Because I want to get through this. I want to be done with this. Landmark believed that in response to new demands or needs, life forms develop new anatomical modifications. Among next paragraph, the other scholars who believe that life had changed over time was the English physician, naturalist, and poet Erasmus Darwin, grandfather of Charles Darwin. Darwin's remarkable attention to detail enabled him to connect his voluminous, that's a new word, reading with his personal observations made during the Beagle voyage. That process, he saw, could be reconstructed through the fossil record. This evidence strongly suggested to Cuvier that an earlier species had transformed into the modern species, most likely through a succession of species over time. Next paragraph. Darwin decided. Where's Darwin? Darwin decided. Darwin deduced. Darwin deduced that the natural selection was the primary mechanism of evolution. paraphrasing at this one, 1830s, after the 1830s. He gathered enough evidence and developed his ideas enough to begin writing his great work about evolution by means of natural selection. Should put Darwin. This is probably an important detail here. It's going to take a little bit of time to write down, but anyway, in 1858, the English naturalist and explorer Alfred Russel Wallace sent Darwin a letter in a 20-page report outlining Wallace's theory of evolution by means of natural selection. Getting there. Okay, the next paragraph. Darwin and Wallace made monumental discoveries. But neither man could come up with a compelling explanation of the physical mechanisms by which evolution takes place. Okay, moving on to section 3 now. Darwin believed that each body part contained invisible particles called gemmules. Next paragraph. These plants enabled Darwin to identify and carefully observe seven characteristics or traits that were especially informative about breeding and its outcome over generations. Later, scientists determined that the physical unit of inheritance, the gene, has two subunits, one from the father and one from the mother, each called an allele. Next paragraph. While Darwin's theory generated immediate excitement in the scientific community and among the public, and was supported by leading scientists of the time, such as Thomas Henry Huxley. Mendel's theory of inheritance forms the basis of the modern discipline of genetics, the study of specific genes and their function and transmission. Okay, next paragraph. The genes are on chromosomes, and both the hereditary material and its carriers are duplicated during reproductive cell division. Okay, next paragraph. This is an important detail. Darwin's theory provided the mechanism for one cause of evolution, and Mendel's theory showed how traits are passed on systematically and predictably. We're getting there. We are getting there. Next paragraph. Natural selection, the guiding force of evolution, could operate only on variation that already existed in a population. The next paragraph says, gene flaw, a third case of evolution, is the diffusion or spread of new genetic material from one population to another of the same species. The next paragraph says, genetic drift is a random change in the frequency of alleles that is of the different form of a gene. Next paragraph. By the mid-20th century, the four causes of evolution: natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift were well defined thanks to a synthesis of ideas drawn from the full range of sciences that deal with biological variation. Next paragraph. Once chromosomes were recognized as the carriers of genes, scientists sought to understand the structure of DNA, which makes up chromosomes. Okay, next paragraph. Analysis of the DNA form a wide variety of organisms, including primates, has provided both new perspectives on biological relationships and a molecular clock with which to time the branches of evolution. Okay, that's the end of the sentence. The next sentence. The birds, however, were rapidly declining until a new, larger species of invasive snails spread into the region. Next paragraph. The questions Darwin and his colleagues asked, especially about how physical attributes pass from parents to offspring, laid the foundation for the study of inheritance, science of genetics, and eventually the DNA revolution and the field of genomics. Next sentence, next paragraph. Indeed, the remarkably high level of evolvability of viruses makes them among the most biologically successful and deadly occupants of Earth. Final sentence, final paragraph. Today's knowledge of the mechanism of genetic change in the virus is built on the foundational work in evolution pioneered by Darwin in the 19th century. And we're done. I believe that we are done. We are done. We are done. We are done. We are done.